Maybe I'm supposed to hate Postal 4 No Regerts. Maybe that's sort of the point. After all, developer Running with Scissors describes it as a sequel to the worst game ever, Postal 2, renowned for its vulgarity and rough edges. If the goal was to make one that's even worse, then that's certainly been achieved. But that gag doesn't mean it's ever fun to actually play. Even for the novelty of a guilty pleasure, like watching a really bad movie for a laugh, Postal 4 only ever disappoints. If I could somehow forgive the corny writing,
assuming you have the right talents, of course,
bad graphics, awful gunplay, and constant bugs, it would still be incredibly difficult to enjoy any game that hard crashes every hour or so. Whether you're in on the joke or not, there's nothing on offer here except pain.
You don't want to die.
yeah.
Postal 4 bills itself as a satirical open-world shooter that wants to push the limits with a raunchy, over-the-top style and a crass subject matter in the same vein of South Park. The main difference is that South Park usually backs up its outrageous ideas with smart writing and some kind of coherent message or meaning behind the madness, while Postal 4 almost never sticks the landing. Its sophomoric, cringe-inducing writing is mostly made up of pointless sexual gags and literal toilet humor, and it all feels like it was spewed out by a 4th grader who just learned their 10th naughty word. There's one part where you have to unclog a sewer by smacking huge piles of feces with a shovel, and another where you visit a vagina-themed amusement park for no discernible reason. It's embarrassingly juvenile stuff, to be sure, but if the dialogue were at least well-written or clever along the way, I'd have no problem with that. It isn't. Instead, it's got all the subtlety and nuance of an enraged ape throwing its dung. If you even consider Postal 4's sloppy chain of errands a story, it's an absolutely miserable one. You play as the Dude from Postal 2, a bathrobe-wearing ne'er-do-well as he searches for his stolen mobile home and tries to scrape out a living by doing a series of bizarre non-sequitur chores for the locals. Along the way, you meet a cast of unhinged characters, like a man obsessed with bidets or a foul-mouthed mobster, and must complete a chain of quests for each of them before moving on to the next set. After seeming not to bother with telling a coherent story for the first 14 of its 15 hours, the end bizarrely tries to throw a curveball at you and make you care about anything that's happened, with a plot twist that fell flatter than my uncle thinks the Earth is. It's a mess, and that's before we even touch the parts that delve into sensitive political topics. Unlike the generally excellent commentary found in Grand Theft Auto 5, Postal 4 left me wincing for hours as it takes on heavy issues with the finesse and grace of a grease fire. One mission had me launch Mexicans over a border wall via a giant slingshot, and another had me reform some prison inmates by beating them senseless. As someone with practically no boundaries when it comes to comedy, I'm definitely not one to clutch my pearls just because a game is making light of hot-button issues for the sake of shock jokes. But Postal 4 does offend me by how painfully unfunny it is nearly every step of the way. The fact that it so wildly misses the mark while using such heavy topics as the subject just makes the comedy that much harder to bear. In fairness, there are the tiniest slivers of moments where I can see what Running with Scissors was going for. One section where I painted over a gang's graffiti and was attacked by a group of Karens who accused me of cultural appropriation caught me off guard and made me smile, while another that forced me to cast my vote in an election that was clearly rigged came close to making something resembling a point. These moments got a chuckle out of me, but they're so buried under jokes that sent a full-body cringe through my system, it was hardly worth exhuming them. If you were hoping that maybe some wacky, larger-than-life FPS combat could make up for the comedy shortcomings, I have some awful news. By every metric, playing Postal 4 is a complete horror show. The open-world areas are empty and lifeless, gunplay is clunky and unsatisfying, and technical issues and crashes are near constant. It's a veritable sample platter of everything a video game could get wrong. When it's at its best, gunplay relies on being completely over the top to compensate despite for its lack of polish. For example, you might stick a living cat on the end of your gun to use it as a silencer, or dual-wield rocket launchers like some kind of monster. That wackiness isn't without some merit, even if it occasionally strays into eye-rolling territory, like the fact that you can and are sometimes compelled to pee on enemies in lieu of firing a weapon. But good times birthed from originality are almost always bogged down by janky fundamentals that simply don't deliver. Enemies are so dumb that they just stand around mindlessly waiting to be killed or get stuck in the environment while you spray them with imprecise weapons that are awful to fire. Every minute of it feels terrible. Most of this frustrating action takes place in the city of Edenson, a desert area where you'll commit numerous felonies, take on optional challenges, and ride mobility scooters through mostly empty spaces. It's a sandbox that expects you to create a lot of your own fun, but Postal 4's open world tends to make that pretty difficult when there's so little to do or discover. Even going on a GTA-style rampage has very few consequences, since the police officers are pushovers, and I ended up mostly passing right through new areas on my way from one story mission to another. The only remotely fun part about roaming Edenson is that your emote selection is fairly strong and often comes with music cues, so at least I got a kick out of twerking all over town. But the biggest issue with Postal 4 by a long shot is how terribly it runs. I mean, this thing just crashes and crashes and crashes and crashes some more. And even when it's not crashing, there's a parade of other bugs to almost constantly make life harder on you. I saw people phase through the environment like this sad lady.
Ow, bitch!
I fell into broken areas of the map with no way to escape, and much, much more. Postal 4 is so unstable that I found myself panic saving every couple of minutes, living in fear of what might horribly go wrong next, which it then did, without fail. Even during the rare periods of time when no bugs or crashes were happening, performance issues still meant it ran absolutely terribly. My PC has a GeForce RTX 2080 Ti GPU alongside a Ryzen 9 CPU, but it still couldn't save this unoptimized catastrophe from itself. Everything looks awful, especially characters. Moving from area to area results in abnormally long loading and autosaving times that leave you frozen in place. And the frame rate jumps up and down wildly, especially when a lot is happening on screen. You name it, Postal 4 probably has trouble doing it. Postal 4 No Regerts clearly wants to be a hilariously edgy, so bad it's good follow-up to its infamous predecessors, but it misses that mark in every way. The comedy is lazy and embarrassing, the combat is messy and painfully unsatisfying, and it runs so poorly on high-end hardware that it can scarcely be enjoyed at all, even by those just hoping for some campy shock humor. The open world of Edenson also completely disappoints as a destructive playground due to its empty, bland areas that can't even make self-driven chaos any fun. Put all of that atop a terrifying pyramid of bugs, glitches, and frequent full-on crashes, and you've got one of the most thoroughly unenjoyable mistakes ever created. You should not play this game, and I wish that I hadn't. I'm no stranger to terrible first-person shooters, so if you want 2 more recent ones to avoid, check out my reviews of Nerf Legends and Crossfire X. Or, for everything else, including games actually worth your time, keep it right here on IGN.